Hello, hello. Thank you to those who joined on time. No, I'm just kidding. All right, people are starting to trickle in. As is usually the case, we're going to give everyone a couple of minutes before we get started. I might be a new face to everyone if you've attended any of the Consensus Scaling Pre-Sales webinars before. My name's Aaron John Muhammad. I lead marketing at Consensus. So I might do things a little bit differently, but we'll get right into the bulk of our conversation in just a moment. If you want to jump in with your name and where you're from, and if this is the first time you've been to one of our webinars, if you want to jump in the chat section and let us know name, where you're from, and if this is your first time attending a Consensus webinar. Nice. Hello, Peter, from the Bay Area. Rob from Denver. I used to live in Littleton, Denver, or Littleton, Colorado. It's a part of Denver, I guess. Sylvain, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Atlanta. We've got a few team members from Atlanta. Eduardo from Argentina. This is an international affair. I used to live in Bahia Blanca and Mar del Plata. Let me know where you're from. I'm impressed. We got a lot of first timers on this. All right, I'm going to do a countdown. We've got 30 seconds and then we'll jump into this. This is recorded. So if you come in late, you'll get a copy of this. No problem. Buenos Aires. Well, thanks for coming on, Eduardo. Those are kind of boring questions, weren't they, Kevin? Should have asked something more personal and fun.
I think it was still effective.
We'll do that next time. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So as mentioned, my name's Aaron John Muhammad. I lead marketing at Consensus. It was my first time hosting the Scaling Pre-Sales webinar series for Consensus, but I've been at the company for a little over 7 months. A little background on me. I used to be an enterprise field rep. So for the first 10 years of my career, I carried a bag and traveled a ton. Platinum Delta, baby. And then I just missed my family. So I changed jobs and got into marketing. How about that? But I love being in a company that tailors to pre-sales people because this is just it's a different world. And I hate to say that because as an enterprise rep, I've worked with my fair share of sales engineers, but I can tell you from personal experience, we don't get it as much as we should. So that's props to you pre-sales folks. But the real star of the show is going to be Kevin O'Keefe. Kevin, a little background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I currently work at Salesforce. I manage a team of 11 SEs. And I live in Toronto, and I've got a little bit more background that I'll share when I get into my presentation. But been in SaaS for going on 15 years now.
Awesome. We had a preview call this week, and I got to say, the things that Kevin is going to touch on today, obviously relevant. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this as part of our webinar series. But the themes that you cover really capture some of the top hot topic items that I hear day in and day out from thought leaders in this space and from customers. So really excited for your content. If we can go to the next slide for my one and only shameless plug. I'm sorry, I have to do it. I'm in marketing. So we just last week released, I think it was last week, our sales engineering compensation and workload report from 2022. There's some incredible insights in there. If you haven't yet picked this up, you can go to our website and download a copy. It's goconsensus.com. There are some crazy insights. We're actually going to pull some of the insights from this research into the conversation today. I'm going to do my best to touch on some of the themes, but there are some great benchmarks in here around compensation, obviously, around workload, key activities, high impact activities, demoing, AE, SE ratios, just a lot of cool insights. We're trying to elevate the pre-sales motion. We sell only to pre-sales teams. And so this is kind of at the heart of what we do. And we love doing this research because it gives us a great lens through which we can look at the space and offer some interesting insights. So if you're interested, I highly recommend it. I know I'm biased because I helped draft it, but it came from responses from over 1,000 pre-sales leaders and individual contributors. So really it comes from all of you. So thank you. If anyone on this thread participated in the original survey. All right, Kevin, that's it. I have no more shameless plugs. We're going to jump into your content. I'm going to pepper in some conversation and questions, but take it away, my man.
Thank you so much, Aaron. Big props to you, Garrett and John from the Consensus side. We've been working together for a little while to come up with this topic. And it's something I'm extremely passionate about. You probably see that over the next 20 or 30 minutes. Everybody who's joined, appreciate everybody jumping on. Fun fact about me and Consensus, several years ago at my old gig, I was looking at a Consensus style product, looking at some of the other players in the industry. And Garen was selling directly to me.
Our CEO.
Yeah, your CEO. And so shout out to Garen for having a fantastic product and just being a great overall person, and who's this company's doing fantastic things now. So wanted to share that little known fact.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll let Garen know. And yeah, if you're not following Garen Hess on LinkedIn, I can maybe send out his information afterwards. But he's awesome. He's really engaged, obviously, with this space, and has been a sales engineer himself, so he knows what it's all about. So thank you for that. By the way, before you jump into it, I forgot to mention, if you guys have any questions, please, I'm going to try my best to jump into the chat and answer questions as I can, or at least flag those for you, Kevin. Okay, so that we can make this conversational. So feel free to jump in with some questions. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you miss any of this or have to jump off early, we're going to send this out to everyone that attended. So the recording of this will go out to all of you. Thank you for joining. Go ahead.
Awesome. Great. So today the focus is when to take the risk. When you're hiring SEs, especially looking at SEs that are outside of the box, which is a pretty common term to think about candidates that maybe don't come from the traditional sense that join pre-sales or for being solution engineers. Before we jump into that, I wanted to share a little bit more about myself and my journey becoming an SE. I like to refer to myself as the heavy metal dad, and so that's me, and that's self-proclaimed. Here's me and my family. We took some photos last year. The only way my wife would allow us to, or I would allow us to take photos, was if we could wear band t-shirts, and we could do it in an area in Toronto called Graffiti Alley. So we ended up doing a combination of family photo shoot and engagement photos. I say it here in a second, but we're getting married in Mexico later this year. And so, I had the heavy metal influence flowing through our family photos.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So in terms of my journey as a solution engineer professional, I started out really young at my first job at Resolver, which is a Toronto-based SaaS company. And I spent 13 years there. I grew up there. It was my start began in professional services, right at the ground floor, and worked my way up to leading engagements before I actually became essentially the first SE. They didn't have that as a formalized role. And I was able to move in and become that SE. And really, at the beginning, it was pretty rough. It was busy supporting all the AEs in the company. But what a great, foundation for learning. 6-7 years of working in the product as a consultant with customers, and then just going and, just doing discovery and demo for anybody that would listen. It was great. I eventually started a solutions engineering team there. And it was a great spot for me in that I was able to, basically set up a lot of the initial processes and methodologies. When you're starting something, there's nothing that exists. So you've got to create it. And I was able to take influences and learn, which I think is really like foundational in where I'm at right now, because I was able to set up how we track things in Salesforce, track demos in Discovery. I was able to buy products. At the time, I didn't end up buying Consensus. I bought another product, but I went through an evaluation.
Shameful.
I was able to do it. I know I had to, I didn't want to run away from that point. But I think that was really helpful. So Resolver sold actually what's called GRC, Governance, Risk, and Compliance software. And I've actually borrowed a little bit of concepts from when I was an SE and when I was in services and layered that into today's presentation, because part of GRC is risk management. GRC is IT security, audit, regulatory compliance. And so risk is really the business that I used to sell products to customers in, and I borrowed a little bit of that. So let's move forward a little bit. In terms of my life, you see my kids, my soon-to-be official wife. We also have 2 bulldogs. They're Pancake and Twinkie. You might hear one of them bark. Pancake's the loud one. Being Toronto and Canada, both my kids play hockey. I'm the coach. I'm also a big Buffalo Bills fan. So, my heart was broken a little bit earlier this year, but next year, that's what we've been saying for a long time. That's great. So, continuing on, being at Resolver, small SaaS shop, and then moving over to Salesforce, obviously a large, big company. I feel like, my perspective, starting an SE team and now working in a very large, mature solutions organization has allowed me to have this, kind of unique perspective. The combination of both of those and my learnings from my old days are really what's formed today's session, where hopefully I can help people understand, when and where to take some risk. And also educate you maybe a little bit around that and throw a few interesting insights out there for people to think about. There's really no wrong answers in all of this, which kind of makes it fun, and that's where I'm coming from. All right, so agenda and focus for today. Not everybody knows what risk management is. It's not the most exciting topic either. So I'm going to do a little bit of theory, a little bit of education around that. I've also created a risk calculator. I'm going to probably, get some flack for this, but let's see if this can work. I'm really excited to maybe help people think about this in a different way. I also want to talk about some profiles of SEs that I brought on board onto my team, where I've taken a little bit of risk, and I want to discuss and highlight that for you all. And then we're going to have Q&A throughout, hopefully. So if you have any questions, like Aaron mentioned, put that in the chat. We can open it up for some chat at the end as well. And so if we're ready to go, we'll get right into the topics here.
You're good. Yep.
Awesome. Perfect. So when we think about risk, this might be one of the things that you think about more often than not. Anybody played the Risk board game? Definitely something that is very common. If you remember in Seinfeld when they were playing Risk board game, Newman and Kramer. So that's pretty common. Now, I mentioned I love heavy metal. So definitely another influence here is Megadeth had an album called Risk, right? So maybe you're a big awesome Megadeth fan. Yeah, not their best album, by the way. And then, when you're going swimming, or you might see risk signs all over the place. That's probably what you think about when you hear risk. But let's be fair, risk is everywhere. It's more relevant today than it's ever been. But do you really know what risk means, or what risk management means? Let's get into what it means. And so, I've gone into the real depth here. So the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, this is how they define risk. And I think, that definition applies kind of all over the board. Maybe it's a bit, scholarly, but the idea is that any business or organization, regardless of size or complexity, if you know what your objectives are, you want to try to make sure that there isn't some uncertainty around achieving those. And that's really what risk is. And it boils down to be that simple. But I'd like to go a little bit deeper. Here's some examples of like a fictitious company. So these are three objectives, company objectives. They're all pretty standard, generic. They could apply to any company across any sort of vertical or industry for the most part. And then what I've got up here is like a traditional, they call it a heat map in risk management terms, but this is a scatter plot where we're looking at the likelihood of risks and the impact of risk. So, how likely a risk is to occur, and then, oh, hey, if it did occur, how much impact would it have? And so here's a sprinkling of a few risks in that you'd look at right at the top of a big organization with objectives like the ones below. Cybersecurity, hiring talent, that's what we're talking about today. Regulatory. So you'll see I've plotted them in a bunch of different ways. This comes from a bunch of my experience working with a wide variety of companies, thinking about, hey, what are the areas that you should be thinking about that could affect your hitting those objectives, right? What could impact your business? This last one here, business continuity, I thought would be something I could pick on a little bit. Business continuity, I used to do risk assessments for a huge Canadian-based bank, and this was right at the beginning of my career. And when we did those, it was so common that something like business continuity or disaster recovery, right? That was always something super, super high impact. If our business couldn't run, right, what are we going to do about it? But it's super unlikely, right? What sort of disaster, what sort of situation, there's never going to be a pandemic, right? And then obviously there was one. So this is extremely timely, and it's important to think about how all these risks are not always negative, okay? So let's move forward. So when we think about risks should also be thought about in terms of opportunity, okay? And so when we talk about opportunity, we're going to discuss a little bit today how here's a really good example of how opportunity came from risk. We're looking at a spirit distiller. Many of the spirit distilleries ended up making hand sanitizer, right? And so, business maybe couldn't happen the same way. We need to help and ensure that everybody's safe. All of a sudden, your whiskey brands, your gin, your vodka brands are all making hand sanitizer. Another really simple example of exploiting or going after a risk and turning it into an opportunity. Hey, you're worried about a competitive risk. Maybe you push out a new product, right? That's a way you can go after a risk and turn that into an opportunity. And so obviously our spirit distillers were a fantastic example, timely relevant for the last few years. Looks like we're on the other end of that for the most part, but I knew that one would be interesting. So let's talk about the objectives for a solutions organization. So maybe my team or the overall solutions organization that I operate in, these are some, again, generic examples of objectives for us. There might be some disagreement, or there might be pre-sales or solutions shops that operate differently, but for the most part, these are fairly relevant, all pretty common. And the idea here is, where can we identify potentially some gaps, right? If we know what we're aiming for, we understand our gaps, we look for spots where we can make a material difference in our business. So thinking about these objectives, I've gone ahead and I've set up a view around some of the risks to a solutions organization. Again, this is all, fictitious, but they're all super relevant, and but it's not exhaustive by any means. So let's take a look. When we want to support our sales organization, what are some risks? Well, maybe our SEs or solutions team has some product gaps, right? Maybe we don't have enough capacity. Maybe the ratios are inadequate, and therefore we're just not really there, to help them as much as we should or could. In terms of hiring and retention and developing, maybe onboarding is not where it needs to be. What about the career path for your SEs? Maybe there's nowhere for them to go. Maybe that leads to attrition. Last part around maybe creating assets, best practices. Maybe enablement is out of date or needs to be brushed up. Maybe you don't have the proper insights into your business. These are all risks, right? A lot of them might be referred to as initiatives or projects, right? But let's be real here. These could be areas of concern or improvement. We think about them tied to our objectives. That's going to help us get greater prioritization. This is, again, not exhaustive, and many of these might be just fine, but this process can help you understand where you should be paying attention and where potentially you might have some blind spots. So moving forward, the way I would start to think about those risks is definitely opportunities, right? Which of those can you exploit, for lack of a better term, to go after, help your organization, help the business move forward? There's a ton of risk versus reward or risk versus return examples out there. The spirit of this is make sure you understand what your objectives are, first and foremost. If you know what your objectives are, you know where you're aiming at, prioritize the areas that will have the most impact, and then just watch out for those blind spots. And you start to think about it in that way, your own solutions organization or team, you're now treating it just like a little mini business, and you can go after and think about those areas, and that can mean really different results potentially. So we're going to get into the fun stuff now. Okay. As I mentioned to you all, I'm a first line manager. I run a team of 11 SEs. I'm part of a huge organization at Salesforce, the SMB business. And as first line managers, there's something that I really want to call attention to, is that you have the ability to impact, but you only have so much control, right? There's only so much you have in your control. So, for example, onboarding, enablement, reporting initiatives, some of those risks we talked about, you can really make a difference with those. But here's the real talk as a first line manager. You're basically, you only have so much input on when you can hire. Okay. And if you're not in a position to hire when the headcount's there and when you're ready, you run the risk of losing that. And that could be detrimental, right? You need to get bodies in. It's competitive out there. You also need to look at all the potential options you have, and you need to be on top of that.
Well, we'll probably jump into this, but I want to point
ahead.
out, I did a quick search on LinkedIn. I think there are 65,000 open SE and SC positions on LinkedIn. And it seems to continually be one of the hardest problems to solve. How do you hire and onboard and retain talent? Burnout's one of the biggest problems.
Mm-hmm.
Also onboarding. I mean, your average AE takes 4 months to onboard. SEs can take anywhere from 7 to 12 months, sometimes longer than that if you're in the enterprise and support a wide breadth of technologies or product lines. So emphasizing this point, I mean, this is where it all starts, getting the right team in place.
Yeah. I think, there's going to be a lot of people who are in a position similar to me, where they won't know exactly when they're going to hire. They won't have the,
right.
The specific decision on why and how. And so, that takes you really understanding what's the highest priority for you, right? And I think that's where you start to think about your objectives as a business, and talent should be an absolute important risk. We know what's going on in the industry. We know that it's competitive. You should be thinking about that. And, I'm even going a little step deeper, right? This might be a little, interesting to raise up, but I don't necessarily control promotions and compensation. I have huge input, and I'm making sure that the case is crystal clear to leadership, but, the funds and allocations happen at levels above me. And so, you have to make sure that you're documenting that it's super clear. Otherwise, maybe that leads to attrition. And so you have some hard work to do, and you don't control everything. But it's important. There's one thing you do get to control, and you do get to decide on who you get to hire. And I think this is the spot where we're going to pivot and say, based on what we do have in our control, right? we can truly be responsible for this. We can put the efforts in, and that could make a monstrous difference on our business. And let's be really intentional about that. Jumping forward. So we looked at this a couple minutes ago, and we wanted to make sure that we could understand, okay, risks are definitely opportunities. It's the right way to think about it. When we're in a situation, where we're thinking about talent and hiring, you don't want to be hiring under pressure. You don't want to have to make some call on somebody that might not work out. I mean, Aaron just mentioned it, onboarding, ramping up. That's something that could take, for me, it might be 3 to 4 months. Other levels might be much more. And so let's keep in mind here that you don't want to be set up for hiring under pressure. What you really want to do is go after that opportunity when it comes up to hire and be ready with diverse candidates. So, how do you get to that point? Well, I want to stop and have a spot for some reflection here. Not everything's in our control. At my business, we're working with sales. It's a large organization with targets that we need to go after. You need to be thinking about all these different factors, right? You cannot always just go for it, right? You have to be a little bit more calculated. You have to think about a variety of factors that I've listed out here. This is not exhaustive, but when you're thinking about hiring, you need to think about your approach, and you need to ensure that your stakeholders, so that might be sales and other people in your business, as well as your leadership, they need confidence you can hire and that you take the appropriate risk. And so here's a bunch of things to think about. What if you're replacing somebody? What was their tenure like? How do they help support their team? Is that replaceable? Do you even try and replace it? Or do you give opportunities to other people to maybe jump in? Again, that relationship with sales, my business, we're definitely looking at individuals that, are aligned to sales teams in many cases. One person maybe supporting 7 or 8 or 9 account executives. Was that relationship really good? What's their confidence in their SE? Timeline of onboarding. You could bring somebody on that could be pretty quick to get up and running. You might have others where you have to evaluate how long it takes for them to get up and running and whether that's worth it or not. And that's something we're going to get into in a second. Maybe you need to realign things when you're bringing people on. Do I bring somebody on and give somebody else a shot at maybe that larger area of business or more strategic area? Also, hey, you're looking at internal versus external, right? If you hire external, there's a lot of risk involved with hiring external. I'm an external hire as a manager at Salesforce. There's a lot of risk involved. They don't know me. And so, that can be the case. You bring somebody over internal, maybe that's quicker, or maybe solution engineering isn't for them potentially. Ramp up time, as I mentioned. And then this might be a little controversial, but I think that you should be understanding and aware of how long somebody might be on your team for. We're not going to keep everybody for 5 years. And I would love to be able to do that, but that might not be the reality. Do you just need to plug in somebody for a year or two and then reevaluate from there? Sometimes you might have to make that decision, and you might have to get somebody who's more experienced and have them in there and know that you might lose them potentially because they might move on to other opportunities. And that's okay. You just got to think about it a little bit. Okay. So I mentioned we're going to reflect a little bit. I like this Ray Dalio quote. Sometimes his principles, are really clear, but I thought this would be really relevant to the risk calculator approach I'm about to go through. So let's move on. This is a risk calculator that I set up. Okay. If anybody likes Wordle, by the way, which I know is a hot, game right now, I'm obsessed with it. I wish I could, when I'm done, there's just a new one. My brother-in-law introduced me to Nerdle, and the next thing I'm going to show is very much like Nerdle. Nerdle is a little bit harder, by the way. I highly recommend it though. It can be fun. So jumping forward into this, I've gone ahead and I've set up a calculator. Okay. And I want you to think through each area that I'm including in this calculation. So we talk about tenure. I think you should be really realistic and think about how long you might have somebody on your team. I just mentioned this a moment ago. And, let's include that in your calculation. I want you to take that tenure and I want you to multiply it by the title that you're bringing in. You could be bringing in a variety of profiles. Somebody maybe right out of university or college, maybe somebody from a career change, perhaps somebody that's already doing a similar type role. And that's going to drive what type of title they come in potentially. And here's a bunch from Salesforce, all public knowledge. And okay, hey, I'm bringing in an SE, solution engineer, which is sort of your real good starting point. I want you to divide that now by the number of SEs on your team. You got a bigger team, right? You're a little bit more insulated. You have some opportunities to have them, help out and make that new hire that much better. Now, this one, again, we add in what I call the sales hassle factor. And I've alluded to this already throughout the presentation. The idea here is maybe there's no sales hassle. Maybe you've got the fantastic relationship with sales. Maybe you're not replacing a rock star. Maybe there hasn't been a falling out. Maybe they haven't lost trust. Maybe the last one I just called long road ahead. Maybe where there's a situation. I also wanted to throw in there, maybe you're hiring at the end of the year, for example, and you want to throw in your sales hassle factor. And, ultimately, that's going to drive a score. So this score for this sort of, fictitious example here, 10.45, that's a mind-blowing score in terms of overall. So let's get into this a little bit. What does this risk score mean overall? Let's take a quick Zach Morris timeout for a second. I want to be realistic here. That calculator is not real. It's totally fake. I really wanted to just use the calculator approach to say, we can be scientific in certain aspects. We can definitely use, a little bit of stats, a little bit of information to drive that home. But there's a lot of work that goes into making the right hire. And it's not just going to come from plugging in some stats into a calculator. So, yeah,
so anyone that took a screenshot of that, you're telling them to delete that.
Yeah, I know. It's a really, really big arc, to come around onto a point. But the idea is the calculator is not in fact real, but you should be thinking about tenure. You should be thinking about, what type of person you're bringing on and how that'll fit in. You got to think about what your relationship with sales or the other stakeholders that you support in your business. And you should be ultimately trying to bring in somebody that fits where it makes sense. But you also have to be extremely aware of that person coming in and what they could add to your team. I'll get into that a little bit more.
We might cover this, but I would like to dial into that conversation about alignment with sales. You mentioned sales hassle factor. That's actually a real thing that we hear from customers quite a bit. Like, how do you gauge that relationship with sales and the level of alignment that you need to have? Because certainly that goes into your calculation, if you will, on how you build out your own pre-sales team. The other thing is that Eduardo had asked what you think about the difficulty of finding SEs with technical and commercial experience and its relationship with the risk. So I don't know if that's something you want to answer now or hold off until the end, but you can decide.
I have a slide for that.
Okay.
So Eduardo, we'll get to that in just a couple moments. And Aaron, if you don't hear me answer that question, and
I'll come back to it.
Slides, yeah, you call me out. So I want to thank you, Eduardo. That's perfect. So I want to use the chat for a second here. I'm going to put up some numbers, and I want everybody to guess at what these numbers mean. So let's start off here. 150. Any guesses on that? Any guesses?
Ooh, let's see. Average days to get spun up.
Yeah, good guess, Peter. We'll move on. I'm not seeing them all flow in. So let's go 60. Okay. Little bit of progression here. We'll go the last number and then I'll open it up again, see if anybody, 3. Anybody have a guess on what these 3 numbers represent?
Winner gets $500 gift card. No.
Oh, well, you know what?
No.
Both of those are really good guesses, Peter. And Average tenure. All very good. Okay. Here's the results here.
I don't think everyone saw that. So Peter messaged average days to get spun up. 60 is average years experience for people coming in, and 3 is average tenure.
Great guesses, Peter. Thanks for being engaged. So I showed the first one. When I was hiring for a role,
I thought
when I
that
was
months.
hiring for a role a little while back, we had 150 applications. Really fantastic number to pull from. Hard work to talk to many, if not all of them. But I tried. I had 60 conversations throughout there. That's a plus or minus number. It might have been more, honestly. The last one is that took me to 3 candidates. And I think the spirit of this slide is to help everybody that there is like kind of more of a recipe for success, not a risk calculator, right? Having tons of conversations is going to be beneficial. I like to tell everybody that I have conversations with, maybe they're looking for a role or mentorship or coaching, that absolutely, Sylvain just said it's like a sales funnel, same sort of idea. And so I like to talk about how there's actually it's mutually beneficial to say like a hiring manager and a potential candidate or somebody who's coaching. I think it's imperative to have a fantastic talk track as a hiring manager. I think you are able to riff and test out your talk track for your team and your business. And more conversations you have, the more times you're using that talk track, adjusting and tweaking based on the responses. The mutual beneficial part is obviously you're getting access to candidates, right? So you're having conversations with them. You're allowing yourself to do that. One might say, I might be too busy. I don't have enough time to talk to candidates. That's a risk objective prioritization thing. What's one of your key risks? What's one of your key areas of focus? And how much time could you put towards that?
And
But
hopefully
obviously
no one's saying that about candidates. This is so important to get the hires right, as you mentioned. I'm curious, do you have what kinds of questions do you ask in that script, or like what are some of the things that you bring up in that script?
Well, okay, I've got that slide. So I'm promising a lot for this upcoming slide. So Aaron and Eduardo will be handled in this. But yeah, I mean, the idea here is you want a holistic view. And so you want to try and have as many conversations as possible. It takes a ton of effort, right? And you have to have a good solid talk track, and you're sort of doing a lot of repetition to make sure that you can iron out and have that. And then hopefully that appeals to people. They're opening themselves up by learning, potential areas of focus from you. So I like to give people in conversations, as much information as I can share, so that they can have some insight, whether they come onto my team or not. But it does take a whole ton of work. And ultimately, when you broaden the profile that you're looking for, right, that is going to help benefit a variety of areas in general for people looking to find their way into the solution engineering role. When that's broadened and you're thinking about just the critical skills and competencies, you're going to open yourself up, obviously, to a lot of conversations, a lot of people who maybe aren't the right fit, but you get the ball rolling, you build that connection with them, they buy into your talk track, and you can be creating a pipeline for successful hires for a long period of time. Okay. Of those 3 candidates, by the way, 2 are on my team. Another one is another Salesforce SE. So all 3 got down to that. Still talking to many of those 60 plus people that I had conversations with, and many of them have got hired. And I think that goes to show where solutions pre-sales is heading. Lots of roles out there, very competitive, some extremely talented people, and we just got to put in the work for them. Okay. All right. I've been promising a lot on this one. So, the idea on this one is when I'm going into those conversations, I try to look at as many applications as I can, resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn. And, I'm looking to try and have conversations with people from all walks of life. I want to try and do that, especially because I'm an SMB. We are typically starting SE careers. Most of our hires have not been in technical sales before. So what you have to do is you have to try not to make your candidate pool too small. So you do have to broaden it a little bit, especially if you're hiring for upmarket, which I think where Eduardo was referring to. You have to try and not say, for me, I can't say I only want to look at Salesforce admins who have technical sales experience. It's just too narrow of a market. And honestly, when we're selling to smaller organizations, we don't need that deep skill set. So understand really clearly what the edges or guide rails or, the area of focus for your candidate pool, and try to stretch that out a little bit and just know what the critical skills and competencies are. And so here's my example, especially as we're starting solution engineer careers a lot, how have they learned? What have they learned, right? And if they are willing to learn, I'm trying to elicit information around that. As a solution engineer, you need to be naturally curious. You need to know what to focus on ahead of a demo. You have to understand how do you keep your scope in check, and you have to really be aware of what could come up in those meetings with customers and set yourself up for success. But you can't just sit there reading and plugging away and doing research for days on end. You're busy. And so I ask typically, describe some previous experiences where you had to learn something new, and sort of what you learned from that. And I'm looking to almost test the candidates and the people I'm talking to come up with an example. And I'm thinking about how relevant, how far away they are from being a solution engineer. And that's something that I use as a good question, which is not an uncommon question, by the way, but it's something that I talk about. The next piece here is, how did that candidate engage with you, right? Are they looking at really being intentional about differentiating themselves? Did they engage with you uniquely, right? Did they take extra steps? I think those are all important spots, or glimpses, as I call them, glimpses at what they could be as an SE. Because we would love to say that the software or the product that we're selling, that we're showing on screen in demos, is what customers buy from, but they really buy from the person behind the keyboard. And so are they able to pull compelling narratives from their previous experience? Oftentimes I'm looking to help candidates understand you can pull some really cool story from anything you've done in your career: college, university projects, your side hustle, volunteer. All of those are fair game, where you can talk about something that you could tie into what it's like to be a solution engineer. And honestly, they're only going to know that if they've had really good conversations with other solution engineers, and they've generated some good insights and they use that. And I think in order to be an SE, let's say you've never done it before, you kind of got to go through the hiring process and act like an SE by doing research, by doing discovery, generating unique insights, being ready with well-rehearsed, compelling stories and narratives. And you need to weave that in naturally into your conversations with interviewers and hiring managers. And that's how you're going to differentiate yourself and get there. Last part is, if they have the majority of those top aspects, I feel like we can teach the rest. And so the learning component becomes extra important there. Can we teach them the products? Can we teach them how to present? Can we tighten up some of those things? It all depends on the type of company you're at. I'm at a large company. We have a very mature solutions organization. We have a lot of resources, but ultimately you have to think through what can you take on? And if you can't take on somebody, then that might extend or mean that you're looking for the perfect candidate, but you just have to measure that risk. And I think that this is a really good way to think through that. Hopefully I answered Aaron and Eduardo's questions or areas of feedback. Did I miss anything, Aaron?
No, I think you got it. Eduardo was asking about, finding SEs that have maybe in an enterprise space, that technical and commercial experience, how you pair that up against some of the risks. I think you've covered there. It kind of comes down to the person. I've talked with a number of our customers who've told me, enterprise customers selling very complex products, and it's kind of a mixed bag. They'll go with some people who have tons of solution and industry experience, but they need work on the human communication presentation skills. I've had a number of customers tell us that they've actually gone out and found people completely new to the industry, to the profession, like educators. A surprising number of companies are hiring former educators because they have experience guiding conversation. So much of buying now is about guiding buyers, being a buyer coach. And so having that capability, that training built into to guide the buying process, guide the buying experience is so critical. And they're really good at that. And they can learn, like, as you said, you can teach them the rest later.
Yeah.
And so it really comes down to the person, what's their capacity to learn the gaps that exist. Those are always going to be so critical.
Yeah, definitely. The way I think about it is, if the more times I hire somebody that is more along the lines of a non-traditional candidate, right? They're going to tell their friends and family what a solution engineer does, right? And that's just going to, spread the word a little bit more, because this is the job that nobody knows about, right? I mean, I was working at a company for 7 years before I knew what a solution engineer was, or sales engineer back in my old days. Okay, I've got some really cool stuff here. So we're getting right to the end. I wanted to talk through some profiles. So these are individuals that I've hired on my team. And I wanted to give everybody some real sort of concrete evidence on why you might take those risks. So let's start. I have somebody on my team that used to be an executive. This is somebody that looked for a career change. This is somebody that was buying technology at a large company. And, what are some of the risks with somebody like that? Well, they're going to come in at maybe a higher rate. It's possible that it may not be as technical as you wish. And there's some risks there. Can they learn technology? They're probably, have people to do a lot of that work for them. Are they unwilling to change? Is it their way or the highway? And you know what? There's some risk involved in that. But what are the benefits? Well, you get somebody now who is literally an executive, so their presence is unmatched. And then now they have the ability to ask thought-provoking questions, not only to me, but also to customers and to their stakeholders in sales and other areas. And they're going to bring perspective that you can only get by being a leader, being in strategic decision-making. And that's invaluable. So, there's a bit of risk when you have somebody change your career and come in and do something a little bit more technical. But what about those fantastic benefits? Let's go on here. I've also hired an entrepreneur. This individual on my team was running an entertainment company for many years. And, what's the risk? Well, they haven't worked at a big company like Salesforce. And, when you run your own show, are you really open to feedback? And those are some risks that we have to think about. But the payoff here is that we're getting somebody that has a creative, unique mind. They have to build their own business. The work ethic, unmatched, and they can connect with people, because that's how you sell in a small business, where it's reference based, it's person to person, and they're buying your services from you. Last one, I also have somebody that came right out of school and had a failed startup. And, this person, like, you're worried, do they want to move too fast, right? Do they have too much confidence? It's kind of funny examples, but you're worried about that when they come in. But the appetite to learn is ridiculous. The ability to understand the problem by setting up a company that could address a problem. By the way, it failed because of COVID, not because of it wasn't a good idea. And then the fact that they can collaborate is fantastic as well.
And you said these are 3 people on your team right now. They're colleagues, they're peers.
They all work for me. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I also have another bonus one that I put on here. I had somebody that worked at a bank for 12 years, right? And they were in a bank in multiple different ways. But that experience of them working in a bank and, having some glimpses into some of the things that we would do in terms of presenting, requirements gathering, things like that, a bit of sales, but then coming over to where we're at now and having the opportunity to really explore and push themselves on that. You find that, like, somebody working at a bank, like, you're challenged, they're not always open to ideas, and we're letting them flourish. So, it was a bonus profile banker. Okay, I want to wrap up here with the 3 primary benefits of out-of-the-box hires. This is all stuff I've talked about already, but this allows you to hire from a broader pool. Anybody can start to become a candidate if you can really hone in on those specific skills and competencies, and you start to get good confidence around that, you bring people in and you start to make SEs out of a variety of people. There's some risk involved. Do they onboard a little bit longer or differently? Sure. But if you can mitigate that risk, if you can put some controls in place, you can set up, with fantastic opportunities from that. Secondary, this one might be, not as fun, but you hire people who are different. They are going to push you as a leader. I'm getting better because I've taken the shot, the chance to bring in these people, and I've learned a ton through this, and I will continue to learn, and I'm better because of them. And they ask me questions, they bring stuff up to me all the time, and that's how I'm developing as well. And I think the last one here is the real spirit of this whole thing. If you try to approach things differently, it can lead to different results. So let's try to move away from a overly technical, sort of very comfortable hire, and let's try to push that a little bit, and let's see what those results could be. And sometimes those experiments can fail, but sometimes they can get you results that go into the stratosphere.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So, I'll let you
last one.
finish.
I like this quote, Dalio theme here. Hire people you want to share your life with.
That's awesome. So a couple of questions have come through. For those that want to stick around, I'd love to hear your answers on this. You've got a diverse team. How do you measure success with that team? Measuring pre-sales performance broadly seems to be something that there doesn't seem to be good, not to be cliche, consensus around that. But I've heard a lot of different answers from a lot of different people. How do you do that? How do you measure success? What are those measures?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, qualitative and quantitative, right? Like, we're going to have some stats. We're going to know how much revenue they're attached to. We're going to know how much activity, how much time they've spent on customer facing things. And then you can have a lot of like those intangibles, right? Like, I really advocate a lot about balance. If you're working 100% of time on, sales related activities, most people might think, hey, that's the name of the game. I think if you can carve out 10 to 20% of your time to work on other aspects that help the business, but indirectly, like some initiatives, side projects, things that might help sales or solutions, things that might be a little bit different, that take, that might be more fulfilling. I think, we're looking at, are you able to think about a problem or something that might not exist right now, and ultimately hypothesize and execute on that. And so while we have a lot of stats that we can drive around attach rates, potentially win rates, and we're looking at leaderboards very regularly, we also pay a lot of attention to, are they living through your core values, or the generally the characteristics that we see as good valued employees, and we align with those. So there's a lot of structure at a big company, so you're able to use that. At a smaller company, you might have some difficulty doing that. I would just try to find, again, those key objectives, try to figure out what you're really trying to do as a business, and then see how they fit in. And if they're straying too far from those, then that you have to rein it back in, and that those could be good measuring sticks to track how people are performing. But it's not all about what's on the dashboard.
Yeah, really helpful. We actually did insert that question into our research. So if you are interested, I think ARR is the most commonly used measure of success, even for pre-sales teams. A couple of other questions that came through that I can probably answer real quick, and then we'll finish up with one last for you. What is the most common ratio, AE to SE? It's interesting. Average is 4 to 1,
Yeah.
4 AEs to one SE. Individual contributors within pre-sales say it's actually 6 to 1. Leaders say it's 3.6 to 1. So there's a distinction in how the individual contributors view this and how leaders view it, which is kind of fascinating. There's another question about what does the area of coverage look like for pre-sales teams? Interestingly, not surprisingly, rather, about 70% of pre-sales teams support sales exclusively. or support sales, but I think it's, if I'm looking at my research correctly, only 2% of SE teams support sales exclusively. Sorry. Most support more than one revenue team. A lot are supporting increasingly CS organizations, marketing organizations. That would be fascinating to dive into. Anyways, that's also in the research if you have some questions on that. Last one for you, onboarding. I mean, it takes more of a lift to onboard people that don't have the kind of technical background that you typically look for. Maybe just in 30 seconds, since we're a little bit over time, be like, what does onboarding look like for you? How much time do you spend on different types of training?
Yeah, we do. We typically have like a 90-day, approach, but we might extend that to maybe 120 days or somewhere in between, depending on who's there, and that's okay. I mean, I think the hard part for me as a manager is I need to set proper expectations with leadership and other stakeholders like sales. Like, you won't get this person for 4 months, and let's figure that part out. We're focusing on onboarding. It's really about giving them the ability to receive feedback, kind of make it a little bit challenging up front. It's always a little bit easier to go in front of a customer than your peers. So we run them through peer certifications where they're doing discovery and demo, and a little bit of a challenge up front, being open to feedback. Those are going to be key elements of your success in your career. So you want to have that through onboarding, and that's the approach that we take.
Perfect. Kevin, thanks so much for joining the podcast. I do a podcast for the webinar, and thank you everyone who listened in. We'll make this available to all of you, but thanks for your time.
Thanks, Aaron.